In Section 3, we talked about the choice between web and app, and how it's not even always a choice. First, let's say for a moment you choose to make an app. Someone should ask how we're making it. If you don't, you may be in for a shock later on. At the highest level, you can say it's a choice between native and hybrid. Some people say HTML5 for hybrid, but I say they're wrong. Not least because HTML5 is not a single thing, but most of all because it doesn't actually require that. Hybrid is a write-once solution of any sort. Some or all of the code is in some commonly interpretable language. HTML is convenient, but it can be other things. If you ever have to update the Adobe Air runtime on your computer, you have something hybrid on your Windows or Mac desktop. We'll get to it in a minute, but the size and composition of that native wrapper part is where things become less of a choice and more of a continuum. This history lesson is not just nitpicking. Hybrid didn't start with HTML5, and it won't end there. Embedding other software is convenient if you already have the data in that format or have limited development resources. You can hire a guy to write a native wrapper or set up your hybrid app, then keep it up to date with HTML. There are zillions of providers of these, so this is just a small sampling. And there are more all the time as people release new products, and also fewer as the big players acquire other businesses and people like Adobe buy off previously open products. When picking one, think about your investment in learning the platform, because it is a platform, and how much it works with multiple OSs. Many do only iOS and Android, but what if your company issues Blackberries next year? And then there's pricing. Many have trials or are open, but also have paid tiers. The features you need may require a paid license, so check carefully early on before you commit to it. Most of today I'm talking about ideal solutions, but for hybrid tools I want to give a special warning. In the past I was the biggest fan ever of hybrid development, way before most people knew about it, but today most of the hybrid stuff I work on is fraught with danger. Many of these are because of the many proprietary systems, mostly used by terrible overseas outsourcers, which are not open, extensible, or very comprehensible actually. They have weird codes, have a limited number of available widgets, and are proprietary, which means if you cut the contract with the vendor, you have to start over from scratch. Native is always the goal for app development. There's no way around that. Well-written apps provide unmatched performance, access to all the device features, and easily or automatically, depending on how you write and design it, update to look like the latest OS release. To do a good job, each OS you work with has to have at least one dedicated developer. I have met people who are good at several platforms, but don't bet on finding one of those. You also need to have a team of people to manage the App Store and keep up on bug reports. Much like you have SEO and DevOps for the site, wait, you do have those for your website, right? You really have to plan for this, or your app will go nowhere very quickly. And you have to update the app and push releases to people on a regular basis, and quickly after serious OS changes, at least the way Apple does theirs. Hybrid promises to solve all these, and at first blush is easy. You have processes to build websites probably, so you can just buy some tool that uses all that. The upsides are therefore pretty obvious. You can immediately update content, but only if you plan for that, so it doesn't use a local server. But it has downsides. Hybrid simply never looks quite right. Maybe you think that doesn't matter, but users will notice. If you go pure hybrid, you should plan on some custom UI, as emulating the pure native experience won't work. It can also get expensive and complex to make it look native on each key platform, almost as much as simply building natively for each platform. There still is an App Store release, so you have to handle that the same way, pushing updates and watching for bugs. There are serious problems with performance. They rarely or never work well in the background, and resume operations when you switch back, and there are such bad security problems. I know people who consult for the government and banks and so forth who won't even talk to you if you want your help with a hybrid app. The risk of a poor platform decision is poor execution and limited capabilities. And the risk of that is people notice. This banking app is bottom of the pile in consumer reviews. Yes, consumers don't just notice themselves, but they do listen and read to friends. This one doesn't just look bad, and it does for something in 2014, but it has no native-like behaviors. You enter your complete username and password every time for an app. Not remembering your local bank or any other preferences, it's transparently a poorly designed mobile website masquerading as a very poorly designed mobile app. This doesn't have to be a total condemnation of hybrid apps. I already said hybrid doesn't have to be HTML5. And if it helps, you can think of it as not a random bucket of choices, but a continuum, making things more or less native. At the far left is HTML. HTML5 gives us some local caching and has better inputs available. As you proceed to customize the interface, less and less is in the HTML and more in the code. At the far right end, all else being equal, you have remote data, you pick that up as an XML feed or something and render everything in the app directly. But the other choice is how much of the app is built by the web. Titanium and Phonegap and all those do the whole thing by default, but you don't have to. Web views are the buzzword here, and they are great. You can insert little bits of HTML to render things in your app. Everyone does it. Everyone. Most apps you use have web views strewn throughout them. What if it's hard to do that little bit of text formatting in native code? And if your content is coming from the internet already, maybe there's no sense in bothering to code it as a data feed and build an API, then decode it and format it again for your app. Just have your web guys make an adaptive or responsive, but we'll talk about that later, version of the site. As Instagram does, just tear off the masthead and navigation, as at least you should make sure all the basic wrapper components, dialogues, and menus are native controls. Don't believe me? Look. Yes, you should avoid error states, but they're convenient for our purposes to prove the point here. Other big people do this. Uber is pretty shiny, isn't it? So clearly native. But it's not. The center is a big web view like this. And the choice doesn't have to be permanent. The guys at Yelp use them to quickly roll out products they first release on the web. Then, when it makes sense, they follow up with native code. This can even be a good approach for your whole app strategy. Start true hybrid, then add custom plugins, then switch to a native wrapper, and keep going until there's no point in switching out from the web. So where you fall in this chart very much depends on what your project is, what your goals are, what your users' expectations are. There's no single A answer for everyone. A few niche or coming OSs have been or are web-based at their core. Native apps will be developed mostly or entirely using HTML technologies, so are in some ways hybrid with all the advantages of native. The web apps I mentioned in the previous section briefly are supposed to be more literally web apps in the future. W3C really thinks that, but has implemented caching weirdly, and OS or browser makers keep changing what is an allowed cache size. It's hard to build, then hard to plan to take advantage of it in a useful way. Today, you can export an HTML5 web app to work on the Amazon Fire TV, some LG Smart TVs, and I used to talk here about the Firefox OS phone, but there were so few they more or less killed the project recently. Despite the pro-web contingent, it doesn't seem to stick. Things like the death of Firefox OS or no web views in Apple TV apps. If it happens, it'll be later. So in general, don't worry about true web apps right now. I touched on the key reasons for this, but it's a big deal, so I wanted to save a special note for it. Every single place I've worked in the last 5 years that used hybrid to develop their app picked it for upfront cost savings. Every single one. But they also found that the result was not as cheap, and really not as cheap in the long run. One of my long-term clients asked some very pointed questions about why the app didn't look or act right, and was coming up so expensive. They sent a team to do some research and estimating. To meet the quality, QA, maintenance, and other goals of the company, it would be, best case, 5% cheaper to go with hybrid development. That's margin of error. And so they have a native development decree now. It doesn't mean no web views, but no end-to-end hybrid write-once tools like Titanium or SensuTouch. Make sure you understand the risks, and especially the long-term risks, technical debt, and impact on your brand and customers you may incur with a hybrid plan. In the next segment, we're switching back to the web and talking about responsive design, and more importantly, introducing the concept of adaptive design.